Close your eyes for a moment and allow the world around you to grow quiet. Imagine that it is a cold autumn morning in the year 1350. The stars have only just begun to fade, and somewhere beyond the rolling hills of England, the first pale light of dawn is slowly stretching across the sky. There are no alarm clocks, no humming machines, and no warm electric lights waiting to greet you. Instead, you wake to the faint crackling of dying embers resting inside a stone fireplace. The room is silent except for the soft breathing of your family, all sleeping beneath heavy wool blankets. The air feels surprisingly cold. Every breath forms a faint mist that disappears into the darkness above. The wooden walls creak as the morning wind presses gently against them. Somewhere outside, a rooster announces the beginning of another day, while a dog barks in the distance before everything grows quiet once again. As your eyes slowly adjust to the darkness, you realize there is no rushing. Medieval mornings rarely began in a hurry. Life followed the rhythm of daylight, the changing seasons, and the weather itself. Every movement was deliberate because every task demanded time, patience, and precious energy. You sit up on a simple straw mattress, brushing away a few loose strands of hay that have escaped through the rough linen covering. Your feet touch the cold earthen floor, sending a chill through your entire body. There are no warm slippers waiting beside the bed. Cold is simply another companion you have learned to live with. Outside, the village is beginning to awaken. Thin ribbons of gray smoke rise slowly from small chimneys as neighbors carefully feed their kitchen fires. One family is already grinding grain into flour. Another is leading a sleepy cow toward a nearby pasture. A blacksmith is quietly arranging yesterday's tools before the first customer arrives. Every household moves at its own gentle pace, yet together they create the slow heartbeat of the village. If you were expecting people to begin their day with a long, steaming bath, you would be disappointed. That picture belongs to a much later world, but the reason may not be what modern imagination often suggests. The first challenge appears before anyone has even thought about washing. Water. There is no faucet to turn. No shower waiting behind a bathroom door. Every single drop must be collected by hand. Perhaps the nearest well stands only a few hundred steps away in the center of the village. Or perhaps the closest clean stream winds through a nearby forest. Either way, someone must carry wooden buckets back and forth, sometimes several times each day. Listen carefully as you imagine those footsteps. The soft crunch of damp earth beneath worn leather shoes. The gentle splash of water inside heavy wooden pails. The quiet conversation between neighbors greeting one another before sunrise. This simple journey for water is so ordinary that no one even thinks of it as difficult. It is simply life, yet water is astonishingly heavy. A single bucket filled to the brim can weigh more than 20 pounds. Carrying one requires steady hands. Carrying two, balanced carefully across the shoulders, demands strength built over many years of daily labor. Children often help when they are old enough. Elderly family members contribute when they can. Every household depends on teamwork because without water, nothing else can happen. The morning meal cannot be prepared. The animals cannot drink, bread cannot be baked, clothing cannot be washed, and bathing. Well, bathing must wait. Even after water finally reaches the house, another problem quietly waits beside the fireplace. The water is freezing. During autumn, it feels painfully cold. During winter, it can feel almost unbearable. Rivers carry melted snow from distant hills, while wells preserve the deep chill of the earth itself. Plunging into such water is not refreshing. It can leave the body trembling for hours. So if someone wants warm water, they must first create it. A fire must be built from carefully collected firewood. The wood itself was gathered days earlier, chopped by hand, stacked to dry, and protected from rain. Every log represents hours of work. Only after the fire burns steadily can a heavy iron pot be placed above the flames. Then comes the waiting, not for 5 minutes, not for 10. Sometimes nearly an hour passes before enough water becomes pleasantly warm. Imagine watching tiny bubbles slowly gather along the bottom of the pot. Steam begins rising gently into the cool morning air. The scent of burning oak fills the room. The orange glow of the fire dances softly across rough stone walls, while the family quietly continues preparing breakfast nearby. Every minute spent heating water is a minute not spent working in the fields. repairing tools, tending animals, spinning wool, or baking bread. Time itself is one of the family's most valuable possessions. For that reason, warm water is used carefully. A little may be poured into a wooden bowl so each family member can wash their hands and face before eating. Someone may gently wipe away yesterday's dust using a clean linen cloth. Hair might be combed patiently beside the fire while children rub sleep from their eyes. To a modern observer, this routine might seem incomplete. But to the people living here, this is cleanliness, not because they disliked bathing, not because they ignored hygiene, but because every choice balanced comfort against survival. A full bath required an extraordinary amount of water, a great deal of firewood, many hours of labor, and enough free time to make all that effort worthwhile. For most families, those precious resources were needed elsewhere. As the village grows brighter beneath the rising sun, farmers begin walking toward their fields carrying wooden tools across their shoulders. Bakers shape fresh loaves before dawn fully arrives. Shepherds gather their flocks while church bells echo softly across the countryside, reminding everyone that another ordinary day has quietly begun. Nothing feels rushed. Nothing feels dramatic. Only the steady rhythm of medieval life, unfolding one careful task after another. And as you settle more comfortably beneath your blanket, letting these quiet images drift gently through your imagination, remember this simple morning. Because cold water was only the beginning of the story. In the next part of our journey, we'll discover why one of history's biggest myths about medieval bathing became so widely believed. Even though the truth is far more surprising, the first sound you hear is not an alarm clock. It is the distant crow of a rooster, carried gently across the cold morning air. Slowly, another rooster answers from the opposite side of the village. One by one, tiny cottages begin to stir from their night's sleep, while a pale ribbon of dawn stretches quietly across the eastern sky. Imagine opening your eyes in the year 1350. You are not lying on a soft mattress. Beneath you is a simple bed filled with straw, covered by coarse linen sheets and heavy wool blankets that have done their best to keep the night's cold away. The fire that warmed your family before bedtime has nearly burned itself out. Only a few glowing embers remain, painting the stone walls with a soft orange light. The room is silent. You can hear someone breathing peacefully beside you. Outside, the wind slips gently through the wooden beams of the house, carrying with it the scent of damp earth, wet leaves, and distant chimney smoke. As you sit up, your bare feet touch the hard floor, and the cold instantly climbs through your legs. It is a feeling medieval people knew every single morning. There are no heated floors, no warm bathrooms waiting just a few steps away. The cold is simply part of life, as familiar as the sunrise itself. You wrap a wool cloak around your shoulders before opening the wooden door. Outside, the village is slowly waking. A farmer walks across the muddy lane with a lantern swinging gently in his hand. A woman scatters grain for a small group of chickens pecking eagerly at the ground. Somewhere nearby, a cow lets out a slow, sleepy moo, while sheep begin gathering behind their wooden fences. Thin streams of gray smoke rise quietly from dozens of chimneys, disappearing into the crisp morning sky. Every family is lighting a fire because without fire, almost nothing can begin. There is no kettle waiting on a stove. No coffee maker humming softly in the kitchen. Every meal, every loaf of bread, every warm drink, and every drop of heated water depends entirely on that small fire. But before breakfast can even be prepared, another task comes first. Someone must fetch water. There is no faucet to turn. No sink. No running water hidden inside pipes. Instead, nearly every household begins the day with the same familiar journey. Wooden buckets are lifted onto shoulders, and family members walk together toward the village well. If the village has no well, they continue farther. Perhaps to a nearby stream or spring hidden beneath ancient oak trees. The walk is peaceful. Morning mist hangs low over the fields. Tiny birds sing from the hedgerows. The grass sparkles with dew that catches the first golden rays of sunlight. Yet the work is far from easy. Water is heavy. One full wooden bucket can weigh nearly 20 pounds. Carrying 2 buckets back home means balancing their weight carefully with every step, making sure not to spill even a single precious drop. Children help when they are old enough. Older brothers carry more than younger sisters. Parents quietly shoulder the hardest burden without complaint because this is simply how every morning begins. Back inside the cottage, the water is poured carefully into wooden barrels or clay pots. It is crystal clear. It is fresh. And it is painfully cold. The water has spent the entire night deep beneath the earth or flowing through icy streams. During autumn, it bites against your skin. During winter, it can feel almost unbearable. Now imagine wanting a warm bath. Today, most of us could have hot water flowing in less than a minute. For a medieval family, warming enough water for even one person was an entirely different story. Someone must first split dry firewood collected days earlier. The fireplace must be built up again until bright flames dance beneath a heavy iron pot. Then the waiting begins. The water warms slowly, almost patiently. Tiny bubbles appear one by one along the bottom of the pot. Steam begins rising into the chilly room, carrying with it the comforting scent of burning oak and ash. Minutes pass, then more minutes. Sometimes nearly an hour slips away before enough water becomes pleasantly warm, and that is only enough for cooking, or perhaps washing a face and hands. A full bath would require many more buckets of water, many more logs, many more hours. For families whose survival depended on every minute of daylight, that was a luxury few could afford every day. Instead, morning cleanliness followed a different rhythm. A clean linen cloth was dipped into warm water. Faces were gently wiped. Hands were carefully washed before preparing food. Hair was brushed patiently with wooden combs. Fresh linen undergarments, considered one of the most important parts of personal hygiene, were changed whenever possible. These quiet routines may seem simple to us today, but to medieval families, they represented care, dignity, and respect for themselves and those around them. Contrary to the stories we often hear, they did not wake each morning choosing to remain dirty. They lived within the limits of their world, a world where every bucket of water had to be carried, every log had to be chopped, every flame had to be earned. And every hour spent heating water was an hour that could not be spent growing food, repairing tools, tending animals, or preparing for the coming winter. As the sun finally rises above the rooftops, the village becomes alive with quiet purpose. Church bells echo softly across the valley. Children laugh somewhere beyond the cottages. A blacksmith opens his workshop. Farmers disappear into mist-covered fields. Another ordinary medieval day has begun. And as peaceful as this morning may seem, cold water was only the beginning of the story. Because the real reason people bathed so differently was shaped by fear, belief, and centuries of misunderstanding. And that is where our journey will continue. As the village settles into the rhythm of the day, you might begin to wonder if the stories you've always heard are actually true. Perhaps you've heard that medieval people simply hated bathing, that they walked through life covered in dirt because they never cared about being clean. It is one of the most popular images of the Middle Ages. Movies often show muddy streets, filthy villagers, and castles filled with unpleasant smells. The picture feels so familiar that many people never stop to question it. But history has a quiet way of surprising us. The truth is far more gentle and much more complicated. People living in medieval Europe did not wake each morning thinking, "Today I will avoid washing." In fact, they understood cleanliness very well. They simply understood it differently than we do today. To understand why, we have to travel even farther back in time, nearly 1,000 years before the little village we have been visiting. Imagine standing in the heart of the ancient Roman Empire. Instead of small cottages, enormous cities stretch before you. Wide stone roads lead toward magnificent public buildings. Marble columns shine beneath the afternoon sun. Water flows endlessly through remarkable aqueducts, traveling dozens of miles before reaching the city. For the Romans, bathing was more than keeping clean. It was part of everyday life. A visit to the bathhouse was a chance to relax after work, meet friends, discuss business, hear the latest news, and simply enjoy a few peaceful hours away from home. Some bathhouses were so large that thousands of people could visit in a single day. Inside, Visitors moved slowly from warm rooms into hotter rooms before finally cooling themselves in refreshing pools. Steam filled the air. Gentle conversations echoed against polished stone walls. Servants carried fresh towels while fountains quietly trickled nearby. To a Roman citizen, bathing represented comfort, health, and civilization itself. For centuries, this tradition flourished across Europe. Then, slowly, the world changed. The Western Roman Empire began to weaken. Cities became smaller. Trade became less reliable. Many of the impressive aqueducts that once carried fresh water into great cities were damaged or abandoned. Large public bathhouses became difficult and expensive to maintain. Without constant repairs, flowing water disappeared. Without flowing water, many bathhouses quietly closed their doors. But notice something important. The bathhouses disappeared. The desire for cleanliness did not. Families simply adapted. Instead of visiting enormous public baths, people washed at home whenever they could. A wooden basin filled with warm water often sat near the fireplace. Hands were washed before meals. Faces were cleaned each morning. Hair was brushed carefully using wooden or bone combs. Fresh linen shirts and undergarments were treasured because clean fabric helped remove sweat and oils from the skin. In many ways, medieval people believed clean clothing was just as important as washing the body itself. Linen absorbed moisture remarkably well. Changing into fresh linen made people feel refreshed, even when a full bath wasn't possible. This may sound unusual today, but within the world they knew, it made perfect sense. Now imagine a merchant returning home after several days on dusty roads. Before greeting his family, he pours warm water into a bowl. He carefully washes his hands. Then his face, perhaps even his neck. Dust disappears into the cloudy water. His wife offers a clean linen towel. Only afterward does everyone gather around the evening meal. This quiet routine happened in homes across medieval Europe. Not every day looked the same. Wealthier households often had more opportunities to heat water. Poor farming families, especially during harvest season, might only have enough time for quick washing before returning to work. But nearly everyone understood the importance of removing dirt from the parts of the body used constantly throughout the day. Hands prepared food. Faces greeted neighbors. Hair collected dust from smoke-filled homes. These areas received the most attention. A full-body bath, however, belonged to an entirely different category. Think for a moment about everything it required. Several heavy buckets of water, large amounts of firewood, hours spent heating that water. A wooden tub large enough to hold an adult. Enough free time to enjoy the bath before the water became cold again. For many ordinary families, this simply wasn't practical every few days, so they washed differently. Not because they disliked bathing, not because they believed dirt made them healthier, but because they carefully balanced cleanliness with the realities of everyday survival. It is easy for us, living centuries later, to judge their choices through modern eyes. Yet if we suddenly lost running water tomorrow, many of our own daily habits would change surprisingly quickly. History often reminds us that people are remarkably adaptable. They solve problems using whatever resources they have. The people of medieval Europe were no different. They valued clean hands. They valued clean clothing. They valued orderly appearance. And whenever circumstances allowed, many enjoyed a warm bath just as much as we do today. So where did the image of medieval people avoiding baths altogether come from? Why did Europe gradually begin turning away from the great bathing traditions that had once flourished under Roman rule? The answer lies in a quiet chain of events involving fear, changing beliefs, and a world becoming increasingly uncertain. Yet something happened that slowly changed how Europe viewed bathing. And that story begins with the fatting echoes of Rome. Now, let your imagination leave the quiet village behind for a little while. Picture yourself standing in one of the greatest cities the ancient world had ever known. The year is somewhere around the 2nd century, during the height of the Roman Empire. Wide stone streets stretch in every direction. Elegant buildings tower overhead, their white marble glowing beneath the afternoon sun. Merchants call to passing travelers, children chase one another through open squares, and fountains spill fresh water into large stone basins without ever seeming to run dry. In the center of the city stands one of Rome's greatest achievements, the public bathhouse. From the outside, it looks almost like a palace. Massive columns support high roofs. Beautiful statues decorate the entrances. Colorful mosaics cover the floors, each tiny stone carefully placed to create scenes of gods, heroes, and peaceful landscapes. As you step inside, the sounds of the busy city slowly fade away. Warm air wraps gently around you. Steam rises toward the high ceilings. Soft conversations echo across polished stone walls while water quietly ripples inside enormous pools. Some visitors have come to wash after a long day of work. Others have come simply to relax. Friends meet here to exchange stories. Merchants discuss business. Scholars debate ideas. Doctors offer advice. For many Romans, visiting the bathhouse is as ordinary as stopping by a neighborhood cafe might be today. Bathing is not a rare luxury. It is woven into everyday life. Many bathhouses contain several different rooms, each serving its own purpose. One room welcomes visitors with gentle warmth, allowing their bodies to relax. Another grows much hotter, filling the air with thick clouds of steam that soften tired muscles. Finally, cool pools provide a refreshing finish before guests dress once again and return home. Some of the largest bath complexes are astonishing in size. Thousands of people pass through their doors every single day. Keeping such places running is an incredible achievement. Fresh water arrives continuously through vast aqueducts stretching for miles across valleys and hills. Underground furnaces burn day and night, heating enormous quantities of water. Workers constantly clean the pools, repair stone walls, maintain pipes, replace broken tiles, and carry endless supplies of firewood. The bathhouses appear effortless. But behind their peaceful beauty stands an army of workers and an empire wealthy enough to support them. For generations, the system works remarkably well. Then, almost so slowly that few people notice at first, things begin to change. The Roman Empire becomes weaker. Its borders grow harder to defend. Trade routes become less secure. Taxes become more difficult to collect. One city struggles, then another. Roads receive fewer repairs, aqueducts crack, bridges collapse. Skilled engineers become increasingly difficult to find. Without regular maintenance, even the greatest buildings begin showing signs of age. A leaking pipe may seem like a small problem. A damaged furnace may appear unimportant. But when repairs are delayed month after month, year after year, the entire system slowly begins to fail. Imagine returning to your favorite bathhouse after many years. The fountains no longer flow as strongly. Some pools remain empty. A section of the roof has been closed because it is no longer safe. Only a handful of visitors wander through rooms that were once filled with laughter and conversation. The silence feels unfamiliar. Eventually, keeping these magnificent buildings open becomes far too expensive. Heating thousands of gallons of water every day requires enormous amounts of fuel. Repairing cracked stone walls demands skilled craftsmen. Maintaining aqueducts stretching across the countryside requires constant attention. Without a powerful government able to organize and pay for these projects, many bathhouses quietly close their doors. Not because people suddenly stopped enjoying baths, but because the world supporting those baths had begun to disappear. As centuries pass, Europe's great cities gradually become smaller. Many families leave urban centers altogether, choosing instead to live in farming villages where food feels more reliable than crowded streets. Grand public buildings stand abandoned. Some slowly crumble beneath wind and rain. Others become convenient sources of building stone. Large marble blocks that once surrounded warm bathing pools are carefully removed and carried away to build churches, homes, walls, and barns. Nature patiently reclaims what human hands once created. Grass grows between broken stones. Trees take root beside forgotten foundations. Birds nest where Roman citizens once gathered to relax. The world has changed. The people have changed with it. Without great bathhouses nearby, families begin relying more on what they can accomplish inside their own homes. A wooden basin, a clean cloth, a kettle warming over the fire. Simple solutions replace magnificent public spaces. Life becomes smaller, quieter, and more practical. It is tempting to imagine this change as happening overnight. But history almost never moves that quickly. Generations are born into the new world without ever seeing the old one. Children grow into adults believing that home washing has always been the normal way of life. The memory of Rome slowly fades, becoming less like lived experience and more like distant legend. Even so, people still value cleanliness. They continue washing their hands before meals. They care for their clothing. They comb their hair. Whenever enough water and firewood can be spared, they still enjoy warm baths. The enormous Roman bathhouses may have disappeared, but the simple human desire to feel clean never truly vanished. Yet, if the decline of Rome explains why public bathhouses became rare, it still doesn't explain why bathing itself gradually earned such a complicated reputation in parts of medieval Europe. The loss of money and infrastructure was only one piece of a much larger story. But economics wasn't the only reason. As the old Roman bathhouses faded into memory, Europe slowly entered a different kind of world. Castles replaced grand public buildings. Small farming villages became home to most families. Monasteries appeared across quiet hillsides, their church bells marking the hours of each passing day. Life became slower, more local, more closely connected to faith. If you were living in medieval Europe, the church would not simply be a place you visited once a week. It would shape nearly every part of your life. It marked the beginning of the day, celebrated marriages, blessed harvests, comforted grieving families, and reminded people that earthly life was only one small step in a much longer spiritual journey. Because faith touched nearly everything, ideas about cleanliness also began to change. Today, when we hear the word clean, we usually think of soap, warm water, fresh towels, and pleasant scents. But many medieval Christians often thought about another kind of cleanliness first, the cleanliness of the soul. A person could wear beautiful clothes and wash every day, yet still be considered spiritually unclean if they lived dishonestly or treated others with cruelty. At the same time, someone who owned almost nothing could be admired for living a humble, faithful life. This idea appears again and again in medieval writings. Inner character mattered more than outward appearance. That does not mean people believed dirt was holy. It simply means physical beauty was not considered the highest goal. Imagine walking toward a quiet monastery just after sunrise. Morning mist still covers the fields. The sound of birds mixes gently with the distant ringing of a bell calling the monks to prayer. Inside thick stone walls, life follows a peaceful rhythm. Some monks are copying books by candlelight. Others are tending vegetable gardens. A few prepare bread in warm kitchens filled with the comforting smell of fresh grain. These communities valued order, discipline, and cleanliness. Visitors often expected monasteries to be among the cleanest places in medieval Europe. Water was used for cooking, washing hands before meals, cleaning workspaces, and caring for the sick. Some monasteries even maintained small bathing rooms whenever local resources allowed. Far from rejecting cleanliness, many religious communities believed that caring for the body was part of caring for God's creation. Of course, not every monastery was the same. Europe stretched across thousands of miles, and customs differed from one region to another. Some communities enjoyed easier access to springs and rivers. Others lived in colder climates where heating enough water remained difficult for much of the year. But one misunderstanding has survived into modern times. Many people imagine that the medieval church simply announced, "Bathing is forbidden." History tells a quieter story. There was never one universal rule that told ordinary Christians to stop bathing. Instead, church leaders were often more concerned about what happened inside certain public bathhouses than with the water itself. Remember those Roman baths we visited earlier. For centuries, they had been places for conversation and relaxation. But some bathhouses also became associated with gambling, drinking, prostitution, or other behavior that religious leaders believed distracted people from living virtuous lives. Their concern was often about the activities surrounding the baths rather than the simple act of washing. Over time, these ideas blended together in complicated ways. Some people became cautious about visiting public bathing houses. Others preferred the privacy of washing at home. Little by little, customs changed from one generation to the next. Imagine a father teaching his young son. He pours warm water into a wooden bowl. "Wash your hands before we eat," he says gently. The boy obeys without question. Then his mother smooths his hair with a wooden comb and straightens his clean linen shirt before the family sits down together. No one believes washing is wrong. They simply practice it differently than their Roman ancestors once did. Across Europe, ordinary families continue these quiet rituals every day. Hands are washed, faces are cleaned, clothes are changed whenever possible, hair is brushed. The routines are simple, practical, and familiar. Yet another challenge quietly waits just beyond the horizon. It is not a war. It is not a king. It is something no one can see. Within only a few generations, fear itself will begin changing how many people think about warm water. Doctors will offer advice that seems sensible at the time. Families will desperately search for ways to protect themselves. And one of history's deadliest disasters will leave an unforgettable mark on European life. Then disease arrived. And with it came a fear that would quietly reshape the story of bathing for centuries to come. As the years quietly passed, the people of medieval Europe continued living according to the familiar rhythm of the seasons. Spring brought fresh fields of green. Summer filled the air with the scent of grain and wildflowers. Autumn covered the forests in shades of gold, while winter wrapped villages beneath long, silent nights. Life was never easy, but it was predictable. Families knew when to plant their crops. They knew when to gather firewood. They knew when to prepare for the coming cold. Then, almost without warning, that quiet rhythm was broken. In the middle of the 14th century, strange stories began arriving from distant lands. Traveling merchants spoke in hushed voices about entire towns where people had fallen suddenly ill. Ships entered busy ports carrying far fewer sailors than they had when they departed. Villages that had once been filled with laughter had become strangely silent. At first, these stories sounded too terrible to believe. Surely they were exaggerated. Surely such suffering could never reach every corner of Europe. But slowly, the rumors became reality. The illness spread from one town to another, following the same roads used by traders, pilgrims, and travelers. Before long, nearly everyone knew someone who had become sick. Today we know this terrible event as the Black Death. To the people living through it, however, it was simply a mystery. No one knew about bacteria. No one had ever heard the word germ. The tiny organisms responsible for many diseases remained completely invisible to human understanding. Doctors worked with the best knowledge available to them, yet much of that knowledge was incomplete. Many believed illness traveled through foul air, known as miasma. Others thought disease appeared when the balance of the body's natural fluids was disturbed. Some believed unusual alignments of the planets influenced human health. And because no one truly understood how infections spread, people searched desperately for anything that might offer protection. One particular belief slowly became widespread. Many physicians thought that soaking the body in very warm water caused the pores of the skin to open. To modern ears, that sounds perfectly ordinary. But according to medieval medical thinking, open pores created a dangerous doorway. If poisonous air surrounded you, they believed those open pores allowed sickness to enter the body more easily. Imagine standing beside a steaming wooden bath. Warm vapor fills the room. Your skin begins to relax. Today, we associate that feeling with comfort. A physician living in the late Middle Ages might have looked at the same scene and quietly warned you to be careful, not because warm water itself was evil, but because they feared what invisible dangers might enter afterward. This advice spread from town to town. Families repeated it to one another. Neighbors shared stories about someone who became ill after visiting a bathhouse, even when the illness may have had nothing to do with bathing at all. When people are frightened, the human mind naturally searches for patterns. If two events happen close together, they often seem connected. Fear has a remarkable ability to create certainty where little evidence exists. Gradually, many public bathhouses became quieter. Some closed temporarily during outbreaks of disease. Others never fully recovered. The silence that had begun centuries earlier after the fall of Rome grew even deeper. Yet something important should be remembered. Even during these frightening years, medieval people did not simply abandon cleanliness. Most families still washed their hands before preparing meals. Many still cleaned their faces every morning. Fresh linen remained highly valued because people believed it absorbed sweat and impurities from the body. Clothing was aired outdoors whenever the weather allowed. Homes were swept. Beds were shaken out. Simple acts of cleanliness continued as part of daily life. What changed was the attitude toward frequent, full-body bathing in certain places and at certain times. Fear encouraged caution, and caution repeated over generations slowly became tradition. Imagine a mother preparing warm water beside the fire. Her young daughter asks whether they will fill the large wooden tub that evening. The mother pauses for a moment. Instead, she wets a clean cloth. She gently washes the child's face, hands, and neck before carefully combing her hair. "It is enough for today," she whispers kindly. Not because she dislikes bathing, not because she wishes to neglect her family, but because she believes she is making the safest choice with the knowledge available to her. History often asks ordinary people to make extraordinary decisions without giving them all the answers. The families of medieval Europe were no different. They loved their children. They worried about illness. They followed the advice trusted doctors offered at the time. Looking back from our modern world, it is easy to recognize where those ideas were mistaken. Yet one day, people living centuries from now may look back at some of our own beliefs with the very same surprise. Knowledge grows slowly. Each generation builds upon the discoveries of those who came before. The people of the Middle Ages simply worked with the understanding they had. As the fear of disease gradually settled into everyday life, bathing became only one small piece of a much larger story about survival. But despite everything, the fear, the cold winters, and the uncertainty, families still found quiet ways to care for themselves. And those gentle daily routines reveal a side of medieval life that is often forgotten. A story we will explore next. Even in the shadow of fear, life had to continue. The sun still rose over the fields each morning. Children still laughed while chasing chickens through muddy farmyards. Bread still needed to be baked before sunrise. Cows still waited to be milked. And somewhere, in nearly every home, someone was quietly finding a way to stay clean with whatever little they had. If we stepped inside an ordinary medieval cottage at the end of a long working day, we would probably be surprised. The family is not preparing a large bath. Instead, a small wooden bowl sits beside the fire. Inside is a little warm water, carefully heated after the evening meal has been cooked. Nothing is wasted. The same fire that baked bread has warmed the water. The same water may later help wash a cooking pot before being carried outside. Every resource has more than one purpose. The father returns home from the fields with dirt covering his boots. The mother has spent hours grinding grain, cooking over an open fire, and tending the family's small garden. The children have been helping wherever they can, gathering eggs, carrying firewood, or chasing wandering sheep back into their enclosure. Everyone is tired. Dust clings to their clothing. Smoke lingers in their hair. Yet before supper, they pause. One by one, each family member washes their hands. A clean linen cloth is dipped into the warm water. Faces are gently wiped. The back of the neck is cleaned. Sometimes even the arms and feet receive careful attention after a particularly long day. The process is quiet. There is no hurry. Only the soft crackling of burning wood and the occasional whisper between family members. To us, it may seem like only a small amount of cleaning. To them, it is an important daily habit. In medieval Europe, washing did not always mean climbing into a full bath. The word clean often described careful attention to the parts of the body that collected the most dirt throughout the day. Hands prepared food. Faces greeted neighbors. Feet walked countless miles over dusty roads. These areas received the greatest care. Another object held surprising importance: linen. Today we rarely think about the fabric touching our skin. But medieval people understood something through experience, even if they could not explain it scientifically. Fresh linen felt clean. It absorbed sweat. It removed oils from the body. Changing into a freshly washed linen shirt often left a person feeling refreshed. even without a full bath. Many households owned only a few pieces of linen clothing. They were washed carefully and dried beneath the open sky whenever the weather allowed. For wealthier families, servants spent entire days scrubbing garments in wooden tubs before hanging them in the sunshine. For poorer families, laundry day required the help of everyone. Water had to be carried. Soap had to be made or purchased. Heavy wet fabric needed to be lifted and stretched across wooden fences or ropes. It was exhausting work. Yet people continued doing it because clean clothing mattered deeply. Hair also received far more attention than many people realize. Wooden combs, carved from ash, maple, or animal bone, appeared in homes across Europe. Each evening, parents patiently combed tangles from their children's hair. Women often braided long hair before sleeping to keep it neat. Men trimmed their beards according to local customs. Some even scented their hair using herbs gathered from nearby gardens. Lavender, rosemary, mint, sage. The fragrances were gentle, natural, and comforting. Simple herbs growing quietly beside a cottage could freshen both clothing and living spaces. Imagine a grandmother hanging little bundles of lavender from the ceiling beams. As warm air rises from the fireplace, the room slowly fills with a soft floral scent. Nearby, dried rosemary rests inside a wooden chest containing freshly folded linen. Every time the chest is opened, the pleasant aroma quietly escapes. There are no bottles of modern perfume. Nature provides its own subtle fragrance. Many medieval families also believed fresh air itself was important. Whenever weather allowed, blankets were carried outside. Mattresses stuffed with straw were shaken free of dust. Doors and windows stood open for a while, allowing sunlight and moving air to enter the cottage. Although they did not understand germs as we do today, they recognized that stale, damp homes often felt unhealthy, so they welcomed light whenever they could. Looking around this peaceful cottage, it becomes harder to believe the old image of medieval people completely ignoring cleanliness. Their methods were different. Their resources were limited, but their intentions were remarkably familiar. They wanted clean homes, healthy children, fresh clothing, comfort after a long day's work. In many ways, they were not so different from us. Yet daily life looked very different depending on who you were. Because while ordinary villagers carefully counted every bucket of water and every piece of firewood, Europe's wealthiest families lived in a world where comfort was much easier to afford. And behind the stone walls of castles and great manor houses, bathing could become an experience unlike anything a common farmer could ever imagine. That is where our journey will take us next. Now let the little village slowly fade into the distance once again. The smoke from its cottages disappears behind rolling green hills, and the narrow dirt roads gradually give way to wide stone paths leading toward the home of a powerful lord. Ahead of you stands a medieval castle. Its tall towers reach toward the cloudy sky, while colorful banners drift gently in the afternoon breeze. Thick stone walls surround peaceful courtyards where horses are brushed. Servants carry baskets of fresh bread, and the steady sound of a blacksmith's hammer echoes softly against the ancient stone. Life here is different. Not easier in every way, but certainly more comfortable than it is for the farming families beyond the castle walls. Resources that seem precious in the village are far easier to obtain here. There are more servants, more firewood, larger kitchens, deeper wells. And whenever the lord or lady desires it, enough helping hands to prepare a warm bath. Imagine that you have been invited inside. You climb a winding stone staircase lit by flickering candles. Their warm glow dances across colorful tapestries hanging from the walls, each one telling stories of distant battles, forests, and noble families. The air smells faintly of beeswax, cedar wood, and herbs drying from wooden rafters. Somewhere below, cooks are preparing the evening meal. The comforting aroma of roasted meat, fresh bread, and herbs drifts gently upward through the corridors. Tonight, the lady of the castle has requested a bath. This is not something that happens every day. Even wealthy households cannot simply turn a handle and fill a tub with hot water. The process begins hours before the first drop touches the wooden bath. Servants hurry toward the well, carrying bucket after bucket of fresh water. Others feed thick oak logs into roaring fireplaces until bright flames leap high into the chimney. Large copper cauldrons are suspended above the fire. Slowly, patiently, the water begins to warm. Steam rises in graceful white clouds. The room grows pleasantly warm despite the cold weather outside. One servant carefully tests the temperature with a hand. Another carries the heated water upstairs again, and again, and again. One bucket alone is never enough. A single bath may require dozens of heavy trips between the kitchen and the bathing chamber. It is exhausting work. Only when enough water has finally been gathered is it poured into a large wooden tub, handcrafted by skilled carpenters from thick oak planks bound tightly with iron bands. The water shimmers softly beneath the candlelight. Sometimes fragrant herbs are added: fresh rosemary, lavender blossoms, chamomile flowers. Perhaps even a few drops of expensive imported oils purchased from distant merchants. The gentle scent slowly fills the room, creating a peaceful atmosphere that feels almost luxurious. The lady steps carefully into the warm bath. For a little while, the outside world disappears. The cold stone castle no longer feels quite so cold. The worries of managing servants, estates, and endless responsibilities drift quietly away. Nearby, attendants wait respectfully with fresh linen towels. One gently pours warm water over her shoulders. Another brushes long hair with a finely carved comb made from polished bone or ivory. Afterward, soft linen garments are laid out beside the fire, already warmed before she puts them on. For the nobility, bathing is not only about cleanliness. It is also a symbol of comfort, hospitality, and status. When important guests arrive, offering them warm water to wash before dinner is considered a gesture of respect. Travelers who have spent days riding muddy roads often appreciate nothing more than clean clothes, warm food, and the chance to wash away the dust of their journey. Even kings sometimes enjoyed elaborate bathing ceremonies before important celebrations or religious festivals. Despite popular myths, many members of Europe's royal families valued personal hygiene far more than we often imagine. Historical records describe noble households purchasing soap, combs, towels, perfumes, scented herbs, and fine linen in surprising quantities. Of course, not every castle enjoyed such luxury. A smaller manor house might have fewer servants. A harsh winter might limit the available firewood. Wars and poor harvests affected nobles just as they affected farmers. Even wealth could not completely overcome the challenges of heating enormous amounts of water in medieval Europe. Still, compared with ordinary villagers, noble families possessed one priceless advantage: choice. If they wished to enjoy a warm bath, they usually had enough people and enough resources to make it possible. For the average farming family, every extra bucket of hot water represented another hour of labor. For the wealthy, that labor belonged to someone else. It is a quiet reminder that throughout history, comfort has often depended not only on money, but on time. The time to gather, the time to heat, the time to rest. As evening settles over the castle, candles flicker gently in tall windows overlooking the countryside. Far below, tiny lights begin appearing in distant villages where ordinary families finish their simple evening meals. Though separated by wealth and social rank, both worlds are preparing for another peaceful night beneath the same stars. Yet outside the safety of castles and manor houses, countless workers spent their days in occupations where staying clean was almost impossible, no matter how hard they tried. And those forgotten lives reveal another side of medieval Europe that is rarely told. One we will quietly explore next. As darkness settles gently across the countryside, the candles inside the castle begin to burn lower, and the voices of noble families slowly fade into the quiet of the night. But beyond the castle walls, another world still remains awake. This is the world of ordinary working people, the men and women whose hands built the castles, harvested the grain, forged the tools, and cared for the animals that kept medieval society alive. If you follow the narrow road away from the manor house, you soon arrive at a small blacksmith's workshop. Even before sunrise, the forge is already glowing. Orange sparks rise into the cool morning air like tiny fireflies before disappearing into the darkness. The blacksmith stands beside the blazing fire, his face shining with sweat despite the cold weather outside. Hour after hour, he lifts a heavy hammer. The steady rhythm echoes through the village, clang, clang, clang. Each strike shapes glowing iron into horseshoes, farming tools, nails, and cooking pots. By the end of the day, a thin layer of black soot covers his arms, his hands, and even his face. No matter how carefully he washes, tomorrow the soot will return. Not because he dislikes being clean, simply because his work demands it. Now let us continue farther down the road. The fields stretch as far as the eye can see. Farmers move slowly through rows of wheat, barley, and oats beneath the warm afternoon sun. Their boots sink into damp soil. Their hands become stained with earth. Dust settles onto their clothing every time the wind passes through the fields. During harvest season, they work from sunrise until long after sunset. There is little energy left for anything except preparing supper and resting before another demanding day begins. Yet before sitting down to eat, many still pause beside a wooden bowl filled with warm water. The dirt may never disappear completely. But washing their hands is still an important part of the evening. Now imagine another occupation, the village baker. Long before dawn, while everyone else is still sleeping, the bakery is already alive. The great stone oven glows with steady heat. Flour drifts gently through the air, covering shelves, tables, baskets, and clothing in a soft white dust. By midday, the baker looks almost as though a light snowfall has settled across his apron and hair. Fresh bread fills the room with its comforting aroma. Warm loaves cool on wooden racks while neighbors arrive one by one to collect their daily bread. Even here, where the work seems cleaner than farming or blacksmithing, flour finds its way into every corner. Then there are the shepherds. Entire days are spent walking across hillsides beneath changing skies. Rain falls without warning. Strong winds carry dust across open fields. Wool clings to clothing. The scent of sheep follows them wherever they go. Their lives are peaceful in many ways, yet cleanliness remains a constant challenge shaped by nature itself. Perhaps the hardest job of all belongs to the tanners. Their work transforms animal hides into useful leather for shoes, belts, saddles, and armor. Without them, medieval life would be almost impossible. Yet the process is long, difficult, and unpleasant. Animal skins must be soaked, scraped, stretched, and treated using natural substances that produce powerful odors. Even after returning home, the smell often lingers on their clothing despite careful washing. Other villagers recognize the scent immediately, not with anger, not with disgust, simply with understanding. Everyone knows how important the tanner's work truly is. These men and women are not judged by perfectly clean hands. They are respected for honest labor. Looking across these different occupations, a quiet truth begins to emerge. Cleanliness in medieval Europe was never judged by whether someone's clothes stayed spotless throughout the day. That would have been impossible. Instead, people understood the difference between becoming dirty through hard work and neglecting oneself entirely. A farmer covered in soil after harvesting wheat was simply doing his job. A blacksmith stained with soot had spent the day creating tools the whole village depended upon. Their dirt told a story. It spoke of effort, responsibility, survival. As evening arrives, workers return home one by one. Boots are left outside the door. Hands are washed. Faces are wiped clean with damp linen. Fresh clothing is put on whenever possible. Families gather around the fire to share bread, soup, and quiet conversation before another early morning begins. Listening to the gentle crackle of burning wood, it becomes easier to understand that the Middle Ages were never as simple as the old myths suggest. People did not ignore cleanliness. They simply lived in a world where survival came first, and every day required extraordinary effort for even the smallest comforts. Yet there is one final surprise waiting for us. Despite all the challenges they faced, medieval people still discovered simple and surprisingly effective ways to smell pleasant, care for their hair, clean their teeth, and freshen their homes using the gifts of nature. And those forgotten beauty secrets may be the most unexpected part of our journey. As the evening grows quieter, let us leave the noisy workshops and muddy fields behind. The blacksmith has placed his tools aside. The farmer has finished tending the last of his animals. The baker's oven slowly cools as the final loaf of bread is carried home. The village settles into a peaceful silence. A soft breeze moves through the trees, carrying the scent of damp grass and wildflowers. Smoke rises gently from dozens of small chimneys, drifting toward a sky filled with countless stars. Inside one small cottage, a grandmother sits beside the fire with a woven basket resting on her lap. The basket is not filled with jewels or expensive perfumes. Instead, it holds simple herbs gathered from nearby fields and gardens. A few sprigs of lavender, fresh rosemary, mint leaves, chamomile flowers, bundles of sage tied carefully with pieces of twine. These humble plants are part of everyday life. Long before factories could produce bottles of shampoo or bars of scented soap, people looked to the natural world for comfort and freshness. Lavender was especially treasured. Its gentle floral fragrance lingered on clothing, stored inside wooden chests. Small cloth pouches filled with dried lavender were tucked between folded linen to keep garments smelling pleasant throughout the year. When a chest was opened, the delicate scent escaped into the room, mixing with the warm smell of burning oak from the fireplace. Rosemary served many purposes as well. Its fresh, earthy aroma filled kitchens, flavored meals, and sometimes scented warm bathwater for families fortunate enough to prepare one. Mint leaves refreshed the breath after meals. Chamomile soothed tired skin. Nature quietly provided what people needed. Soap itself also existed, although it looked very different from the colorful bars we know today. Many families made simple soap using animal fat mixed with wood ash. The process required patience. Large pots simmered slowly over outdoor fires, while the mixture thickened little by little. The finished soap was rough and plain, without bright colors or sweet fragrances. Yet it worked surprisingly well for washing clothing and cleaning hands after long days of work. For wealthier households, finer soaps could sometimes be purchased from traveling merchants. These imported soaps were softer, and often scented with olive oil or herbs brought from warmer parts of Europe and the Mediterranean. Although they were expensive, they remind us that people valued cleanliness enough to spend precious money on it whenever they could. Hair received careful attention too. Each evening, parents gently combed their children's hair using wooden or bone combs. Long hair was often braided before bedtime to prevent knots. Loose strands were tied neatly beneath linen caps during the day, helping keep hair cleaner while people worked. Clean, tidy hair was considered a sign of good care and self-respect. Even teeth were not completely forgotten. There were no toothbrushes waiting beside a sink. Instead, people often cleaned their teeth with small twigs whose ends had been softened by chewing. Some rubbed their teeth with fine powders made from crushed herbs, charcoal, or salt. The methods were simple, and certainly not as effective as modern dental care, but they reveal something important. People cared about their appearance. They wanted to feel presentable. They wanted fresh breath when speaking with neighbors. They wanted to smile without embarrassment. Their daily routines may seem unfamiliar to us, but their hopes were remarkably similar to our own. Homes, too, were cared for with quiet dedication. Floors were swept each morning. Fresh rushes or dried herbs were sometimes scattered across the ground, releasing gentle fragrances as people walked through the house. Windows and doors were opened whenever the weather allowed, letting sunlight and fresh air replace the smoky air that gathered during cold nights. Blankets were carried outdoors. Mattresses filled with straw were shaken clean. Wooden furniture was wiped down with damp cloths. Every small task made the home feel a little fresher, a little brighter, a little more welcoming. As you sit quietly beside the glowing fire, listening to the gentle sounds of the cottage settling for the night, it becomes clear that the people of medieval Europe were not careless or indifferent. They simply lived in a world where every bucket of water had to be carried by hand, every log had to be chopped with effort, and every moment of comfort had to be earned. They adapted with patience. They used what nature provided. They cared for themselves and their families in practical ways that suited the world around them. Perhaps that is one of history's greatest lessons. The past is rarely as simple as the stories we inherit. People are shaped by the tools they possess, the knowledge available to them, and the challenges they face each day. And when we look closely enough, we often discover that those who lived centuries before us were not so different after all. As our journey through the medieval world gently comes to an end, there is just one final myth left to unravel, one that Hollywood, novels, and popular culture have repeated for generations. And in our last quiet moments together, we will discover why that familiar image of filthy medieval Europe tells only a very small part of the real story. As our journey through the Middle Ages slowly comes to its close, the village around us grows quiet once again. The last candle flickers gently inside a small cottage. The blacksmith's forge has gone dark. The baker's ovens have cooled. The fields rest beneath a blanket of silver moonlight, and somewhere in the distance, an owl calls softly through the night. For a few peaceful hours, the worries of another day have been set aside. If someone from the 21st century could quietly walk through this sleeping village, they might notice the muddy roads, the smoke rising from chimneys, the simple wooden homes, and the absence of modern comforts. At first glance, it would be easy to believe the old stories. It would be easy to assume that everyone simply accepted living in dirt. But now we know the picture is far more complete. The people of medieval Europe did not hate bathing. They did not choose discomfort simply because they wished to. Instead, they lived within the limits of their world. Clean water had to be carried by hand. Firewood had to be gathered, chopped, and carefully saved. Every bath required time, labor, and resources that many families simply could not spare every day. Yet despite those challenges, people still cared deeply about cleanliness. They washed their hands before meals. They cleaned their faces each morning. They brushed their hair with wooden combs. They treasured fresh linen. They scented their homes with herbs gathered from nearby fields. They opened their windows to welcome fresh air whenever the weather allowed. They did the very best they could with the knowledge and resources available to them. History often becomes unfair when we judge it using modern expectations. It is easy to forget that every generation solves its problems with the tools it has. The Romans built magnificent bathhouses because they possessed vast engineering networks and powerful governments capable of maintaining them. Centuries later, medieval villagers relied instead upon wells, fireplaces, wooden tubs, and patient hands. Neither world was perfect. Each simply reflected its own time. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding comes from imagining the Middle Ages as one long, unchanging period. In reality, nearly 1,000 years passed between the beginning and the end of the medieval era. Customs changed. Ideas changed. Cities grew and declined. Kings ruled and disappeared. Diseases reshaped entire societies. The way people washed in the 11th century was not always the same as the way they washed in the 15th. History, like a slow-moving river, is always changing. And perhaps that is why it remains so fascinating. The more closely we look, the more the old myths quietly fade away in their place. We find ordinary people living ordinary lives. Parents caring for children. Neighbors helping one another carry water. Farmers working beneath the rising sun. Monks copying books by candlelight. Travelers washing the dust from their hands after long journeys. These are not people separated from us by some mysterious darkness. They laughed. They worried. They became tired after long days. They searched for comfort during cold winters. And just like us, they wanted their homes to feel warm, peaceful, and welcoming. As the fire beside you burns a little lower, allow these quiet images to drift gently through your thoughts. Imagine the village sleeping peacefully beneath a sky filled with countless stars. Wells stand silent. The fields shimmer beneath soft moonlight. Only the gentle breeze moves through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of wood smoke and lavender. Thank you for joining me on tonight's journey into history. If you enjoyed spending this quiet evening together, I'd be truly grateful if you subscribe to Sleepy History, where we explore the forgotten corners of the past, one peaceful story at a time. Until our next adventure, let the world grow quiet around you. Rest well, sleep peacefully. And as always, good night.